Why being feared is more powerful than being loved.
There are people who walk into a room and everything changes, even when they say nothing. Conversations slow down, voices lower, and people become more aware of how they act. It is not because these individuals are the loudest or the most aggressive. Often they are calm, quiet, and controlled, but something about them creates tension in the air, a silent awareness that actions carry weight. Now contrast that with someone who is deeply liked. People smile easily at them, feel comfortable around them, and engage freely. But slowly, something subtle begins to shift. Boundaries become softer, requests become more casual, respect becomes less defined, not because people are intentionally disrespectful, but because comfort often removes caution. This is the core truth behind why being feared is more powerful than being loved. Not fear in the sense of harm or aggression, but fear in the psychological sense of consequence awareness. The understanding that actions have limits, and crossing them produces outcomes that cannot be ignored. Human behavior is not driven primarily by emotion alone. It is driven by perception of consequence. When consequences are absent, behavior becomes experimental. When consequences are present, behavior becomes measured. This is the difference between being emotionally liked and being behaviorally respected. Love creates connection, warmth, and belonging. But love alone does not create structure. And without structure, human behavior becomes flexible, too flexible. A person can love you deeply and still ignore your boundaries. They can admire you and still take you for granted, because love does not automatically regulate behavior. This is why humans test boundaries, not always out of disrespect, but out of instinct. The brain naturally explores limits to understand structure. If nothing resists their behavior, they assume there are no limits. Over time, what was once respect becomes casual comfort, and comfort slowly weakens authority. Psychology and leadership studies repeatedly show that people respond more consistently to stable expectations than emotional approval. When behavior is met with clear, consistent responses, individuals adjust automatically. When responses are inconsistent or overly accommodating, behavior becomes unpredictable and gradually expands. Fear, in its correct psychological form, is not intimidation. It is clarity. It is the unspoken awareness that behavior has consequences. This creates structure, and structure reduces uncertainty. Humans are deeply sensitive to uncertainty, and they naturally adjust toward environments that feel predictable. This is why silent authority is powerful. Silent authority is not loud or emotional. It does not rely on constant explanation or validation. It is built through consistency, emotional control, and internal stability. People begin to adjust their behavior around it without being told, because it signals that not everything is flexible. In contrast, people who prioritize being liked often over-explain themselves, soften decisions, and avoid discomfort. This creates a subtle shift in perception. Their words begin to feel negotiable, even when they are trying to be firm. Over time, others unconsciously test how far that flexibility extends. This is how respect quietly weakens, not through conflict, but through repeated patterns of accommodation. When boundaries are not consistently reinforced, people begin to interpret them as suggestions rather than limits. And once that happens, influence requires constant emotional effort to maintain. Psychologically, humans assign value based on difficulty of access and predictability of consequence.
When someone is too emotionally available without structure, their presence becomes expected rather than valued. When someone maintains boundaries while remaining calm and consistent, their presence carries weight.
This is not about becoming distant or cold. It is about balancing warmth with structure. Emotional connection builds trust, but structure maintains respect. Without structure, trust alone does not prevent behavioral drift. Another important mechanism is reciprocity imbalance. When one person consistently gives emotional flexibility without requiring equivalent respect for boundaries, the other person unconsciously recalibrates expectations. What once felt like generosity becomes normal, and once something becomes normal, it loses influence. This is where fear, understood correctly, interrupts imbalance. Not fear of harm, but fear of consequence. It introduces limits that cannot be easily negotiated in the moment. When people understand that certain actions will consistently lead to certain outcomes, they begin to regulate themselves. At a deeper level, respect is not emotional. It is behavioral observation over time. People watch how you respond when your boundaries are tested. They observe whether your position changes under pressure, and based on that, they form conclusions about how to treat you.
This is why being too nice without boundaries often reduces authority. Kindness without structure becomes interpreted as availability, and availability without limits rarely creates discipline in others. It creates expectation.
Quiet dominance, on the other hand, is built on stability. It is not about control through force, but control through consistency. A person who does not shift their internal position based on external pressure becomes difficult to manipulate, and what cannot be easily manipulated is naturally respected.
Emotional neutrality also plays a major role here. Emotional neutrality signals stability. It shows that external reactions will not easily disrupt internal standards. People instinctively associate stability with strength, even if they do not consciously realize it.
This is why some individuals command respect without speaking much. Their behavior is not unpredictable, but it is not easily influenced either. This creates a psychological boundary that others naturally adjust around. Fear, when properly understood, is simply awareness of those boundaries. It is the recognition that actions are not without consequence, and that awareness changes behavior more reliably than emotional connection alone. This is also why systems like workplaces, institutions, and leadership structures rely on rules and consequences rather than emotional approval alone. Emotional warmth may improve cooperation, but structure ensures consistency. At its core, influence is not about being liked or disliked. It is about whether your behavior creates stability in others' expectations. People naturally move towards what is predictable and adjust away from what is unclear or easily changeable. So, the real distinction is not between love and fear as emotions. It is between emotional connection and behavioral structure. Love builds connection. Fear, in its psychological form, builds structure. And structure is what sustains respect over time. The strongest influence emerges when both exist together, warmth in interaction, but firmness in boundaries. When people feel understood, but also understand limits, they do not become confused about how to behave. They adapt naturally. In the end, why being feared is more powerful than being loved is not about choosing intimidation over affection. It is about understanding human psychology. People do not respond to kindness alone. They respond to clarity, consistency, and perceived consequence. Once that is understood, influence is no longer something you chase. It becomes something that naturally forms around how you carry yourself. And that is where real power begins.